Dave.
Hi, how you doing?
Cheers for coming on today. So let's just have a bit of a chat about Formula One. So do you want to introduce yourself first?
I can do. I'm David Noble. I've got the David James Noble DJ and Racing Fans YouTube channel. It's great, even I can't remember my own name.
Yeah.
Not used to saying it, I think, is the thing.
Yeah. I leave a link in the description down below. And yeah, so I was just thinking, as this is the Unplanned Formula One Chat, let's just have a bit of a chat about our love for the sport, really. So, what was your first race that you can remember?
It's a tricky one because it's going back to the 1980s, and it's like in my own head, I remember watching like Adelaide when Mansell's tyre blew, and I remember watching the Prost-Senna battles at Suzuka and stuff. But the age I'd have been at the time, there was no way I'd have been able to actually watch that live. So it must have been like replays or something. But my biggest memory about first getting into the sport was my stepdad for Christmas one year when I was about 8 brought a Scalextric set, and it had the Senna black and gold Lotus and the FW11 Mansell number 5 Williams.
Yes.
And it's just, just zooming them cars around and then the sport grew from there for me. Yeah, I remember that as a fixed point in time when I remember Formula One. All the cars and the racing around that time as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty similar to me actually, because obviously I started watching when I was about 6 years old.
Yeah.
My first race that I can remember watching on TV was the unfortunate one at Imola, 94.
Yeah.
Actually, a lot of people say to me that you haven't been put off is a miracle. But
my wife was a big Ayrton Senna fan, and I remember her saying to me that after that she stopped watching it for a long time. So that's a big one. Emotionally, that was a big one.
So can you remember where you was watching it?
Strangely, no, I can't. I'd have been 15 at the time. No, that's really annoying that I can't remember that. Just because that is one thing you would expect to, but no, I mean, obviously the biggest name in the sport, one of the figureheads for it that everybody knew, whether you followed the Formula One or not, and that happening. I mean, it was a weird weekend anyway, because obviously what happened to Barrichello in practice, and then what had happened to Roland Ratzenberger as well on the Saturday, it's definitely shook the sport a lot. I mean, I was actually probably a Schumacher fan at the time, because I'd watched Prost, Senna, Mansell, Piquet battling it out for the few years before that, and I hadn't really got a favourite driver at that point. But then it was like Michael came in, and it's very much the way people, I think, view kind of like when Verstappen and Leclerc and that generation now, the young guys taking it to the older established drivers.
Yeah.
And, seeing Michael battling away with Prost, Senna, Mansell and all that lot was exciting for a young person finding his feet in the sport.
Yeah, so have you always followed like Formula One only, or do you like other sports as well? Like,
I'm a racing fan. I mean, when I was a kid, it's like I dabbled in watching football, but I never really properly got into it. I mean, I think I had a Norwich City top at one point, but that was about as far as it got. I've watched 2 football games in people's stadiums, and the first game was like 1986, and it was Ipswich against Crystal Palace, and Ipswich lost 3-1. And then my stepdad dragged me to a Lincoln game where they were playing Barnet or something, and Lincoln lost 3-1. So I'm a Jonah as far as football matches go.
I mean, I love my Formula One. I absolutely love it. Have you ever been to a race live?
In just Formula One, I've been to Silverstone to see the Grand Prix twice, and I've been there for me and the little guy. I've been there, and my wife on one occasion were there on the Friday a couple of times as well over the last couple of years, having centre access tickets and stuff, and going through the national grid area. And being able to meet some of the Formula 2, Formula 3 guys and seeing like the heritage cars and stuff they had on display.
Yeah, I was in Hockenheim in 2003.
Oh, nice.
But I must admit, I much rather prefer it to watch it on TV, because you can see more of the race, can't you?
Yeah, well, it's one of the things I found. It's what I like about going on the Friday at the British Grand Prix is it's not so busy. It's a sort of more relaxed atmosphere. You still get to see the cars on track and to experience it. But then you can go home and watch the race and absorb the whole of the race. The problem I have is my little guy's 6, and we went there in 2017 for mine and my wife's 5th wedding anniversary, and we watched the Grand Prix at Silverstone there. And trying to get a 4-year-old to sit in a grandstand and not want to go and run off and do things, and didn't understand why you had to stay there. It's a challenge. It's easier from a family point of view to take in the race at home.
I mean, as I said, I was lucky enough to get invited to Williams, funnily enough, in 2013, 30th of October 2013, actually, because I do, apart from the YouTube channel, I do German, English, German translations as well. So if you ever need any of that doing, let me know. But when I started that, I've always wanted to combine my love for Formula One with my business. So I wrote to every single Formula One team. Yeah, none of them responded other than Claire Williams, and not only did she actually write me a lovely letter back, she actually invited me to the factory, so I got a private tour. So
yeah, I can imagine with the situation with Frank, obviously she has a lot of appreciation that, being disabled or whatever doesn't stop you from going out and fighting for a dream. So I can imagine that striking a chord with her. And
earlier today, actually, do you know Matty Gallagher from the WTF1?
I know he's supposed to be doing something with you, yeah.
After we've finished talking, you can watch that one, because I've just literally uploaded it, and yes. Brilliant. So, but coming on to the Williams situation, is it? Well, what do you think about it? And is it sad for you, because obviously you've seen them in the heydays?
Well, I think it's sad in general what's going on with teams like them and McLaren at the moment. I mean, that's a real shock, the trouble they're in. But because with Williams, they've sort of been teetering on the brink for a little while, and 50 million loan getting them in trouble it's not great. The thing is, as I say, growing up, I mean, part of the reason I sort of liked Ferrari weirdly was because they were almost the underdog. Because all I knew was like McLaren and Williams being absolutely dominant in like the late 80s and the early 90s. They, and the idea of them being where they are now, I can't kind of get my head around it, to be honest with you. It's just weird.
It's sad, isn't it? And
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, in general, do you think the whole of Formula One is in trouble?
It depends if they can get the season up and running and they can get the 15 races in that they want to get in. They should be able to ride out the storm with any luck, because then the sponsorship money will be coming in. They won't have to pay any of that back. The sport can actually get the money from TV companies and what have you. And they'll have the money that they're supposed to have and that they need to have. And with the cost cap coming in, hopefully they can look at that with an eye to, okay, if we can just get to that point, we'll be able to sort of steady the ship. But it's very dependent on them being able to get them races in and having a proper season this year, I think.
Yeah. How do you think it's gonna go? Like, do you think there's gonna be any trouble of getting the amount of races in?
There's lots of races that there's lots of tracks that want to hold races, so they should be able to get 15 races and plenty of tracks that are willing to hold events. How many of them will be with a crowd is another matter. The problem is, all it will take is for them to rock up at one track and there to be suddenly about an outbreak of 4 or 5 people with COVID-19, and suddenly the whole thing becomes very rocky again.
Yeah.
So at the moment it's very much sort of praying and hoping that they manage to contain it in a bubble and they can stay on top of it.
Yeah.
There's a lot at risk if it goes wrong.
Yeah, I mean, we can't have another Australia, you know what I mean? We can't have that because they actually flew the teams out there, and then that didn't happen. But I've had thought about, because of COVID-19, I've had a thought whether they can actually, rather than making it a drivers' championship, only focus on the teams, because in case any of the drivers get it, then they've got to get the reserve drivers in. So, what do you think about the idea only focusing on the teams?
I think they're going to run as close to the normal plan as possible, unless it becomes absolutely unavoidable. You don't want to. The thing is, they're going to be running currently of the idea that, in as much as it's possible, business as usual, because the fans, teams, companies, sponsors especially, are going to want reassurance that, it's all steam ahead and we're going to have as much of a normal season as it's possible to do, because it's about confidence at the moment. Because if the fans and the sponsors and the teams themselves and the manufacturers lose confidence in the sport and that it can actually exist and is going to work and will have a bright future, they're going to start pulling out. And I mean, you've mentioned it before, and I'm sure there's been several other people who mentioned it before, that we're on the verge of a pretty serious recession, and companies are going to be looking at where they can save pennies. And if they don't think they're going to get value, or F1 doesn't have a bright, confident future, they're not going to invest in it.
Do you think it actually could die off?
I don't know if it will die off, but I think it could struggle in terms of some of the teams will find it difficult anyway. But it's about trying to stay sort of positive and upbeat and encouraging people. As I said, they're putting plans in place to try and have a brighter future with the cost cap and with the rules regarding trying to level out performance and what have you. So that would help encourage more sponsors to some of the smaller teams, I think, is the idea, so that what they actually want and what Liberty have been trying to do for years is to get to a position where teams are actually making money in the sport. Because the joke is that the best way to make a small fortune in Formula One is to start with a large fortune. So unfortunately, they can't. That isn't an option really anymore at the moment.
Yeah. So do you think the cost cap? Do you think everybody's going to stick to it, or do you think some teams might want to sort of push the boundaries a bit?
It depends on circumstances, because obviously the bigger teams have got other programs as well. Like Mercedes have got their Formula E interest, Ferrari have got countless GT interests and whatever. McLaren are actually pulled out. They did have a junior GT program going on that they've seemed to have cancelled at the moment, because I know it's British GT were asking for people to basically drive the cars that were going to be allocated to them, which is not exactly a good sign. But whether some of the funding will get put off into that direction and there might be technologies developed in those fields which then might benefit Formula One, I don't know. The problem is teams can't afford to get caught cheating, because there's some pretty severe penalties that the FIA and Liberty and whatever have put in place if they get caught out. So it doesn't make any sense to them to do that. The cost cap itself, of course, is primarily on performance-based areas.
Yeah.
So, I mean, some of the smaller teams are not going to have the facilities that some of the bigger teams have got. So, although they're going to have extra, that's partly why they're going to have extra time, depending on where they finish in the championship in terms of access to wind tunnels and stuff. Is because the idea is that will help balance out the different it's in terms of equipment that they have available to them, I suppose. But the money itself is going primarily for performance. So Ferrari and Mercedes and stuff aren't going to be able to just chuck money at it now like they used to, but it won't necessarily affect their ability to employ like the most expensive and best drivers, or to have more marketing, or to an ability to attract more sponsors. At the end of the day, they're still works teams. They still have massive marketing and financial departments behind them that are organized to get cars on the tracks or whatever. And does it cover things like their junior formula commitments and stuff, for example? Because obviously Ferrari have invested heavily in terms of like their junior drivers and stuff. Would it affect or rub off on any of that? Probably not, because it's not performance related, but it's all
we don't know yet, do we?
I mean, they're going to have to, in terms of siphoning money off or putting it elsewhere, there's so many channels and avenues, and it's a complicated business, trying to work out where the money goes. So I don't think anyone's going to intentionally cheat in terms of like blatantly, but it wouldn't be F1 if people weren't pushing boundaries.
Yeah, but the other thing to look at, and I would like your opinion on it. Do you think Formula E is becoming more attractive and a threat to F1?
In the immediate future, possibly not. But it's kind of, because they don't develop the chassis themselves, it's sort of seen as a cheaper alternative. Because it's electric, it's also seen as being more future relevant, so it's a future-proofed series. And the problem is Formula One can't just sort of jump ship if it wanted to and go to electric engines, because I think Formula E have got a license in place saying that they're the only people that can run that sort of technology. The problem that Formula One has got is it's got to find some way of being relevant, because manufacturers aren't going to pump massive amounts into engine programs or Formula One in general if it doesn't become, or it doesn't stay relevant. And the more countries that are going to get rid of combustion engines or even hybrids in the next 10, 15 years or so, Formula One needs another engine it can put in there to go, hey, look, we still count, we still matter, come and invest in us. So while in terms of racing or whatever, I think it's a very different thing, and I'd like to see Formula One obviously having its place. It's still the premier motorsport. It might get outmaneuvered, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but what do you think the solution is? Because as you said, I think, I mean, Formula E have got exclusivity rights for 25 years, I do believe, isn't it?
Something like that, yeah. Well, they're talking about investigating hydrogen, I think it is, isn't there? They're currently investigating, I think, new engine regs to possibly come in 2025, I think it is.
Yeah.
I know hydrogen was one of the things they were investigating. I don't know what the limits are in terms of how they can balance combustion engine output in comparison to the hybrid technology output before it starts treading on Formula E's toes. But obviously, there's a little bit of wiggle room that Formula One may have there that it can play around with in terms of staying kind of road relevant or what have you. I mean, the thing is, there is a lot of people who, although electric does seem on the face of it to be the way it's going in the future, there's still a lot of companies who are like investigating other avenues. So it may get to the point 10 years down the road where we find that there are other possibilities opening up and Formula One might be able to jump on them.
Yeah, we should only wait and see. So, you know, let's have a look at the current Ferrari situation with you being a massive Ferrari fan. What do you think about Sebastian Vettel first of all?
I think there's been a growing frustration on both sides for a while, and it's like Seb winning a title with Ferrari was a dream.
Yeah.
And there's only so long you can go without the dream being realised before people start thinking, well, something here is not working. So I'm not really surprised that it's sort of they're splitting up and going their separate ways. You know, it happens. You know, people go into relationships with the best one in the world, always planning on it being reasonably successful, but they're not always. It's not anyone's fault. I'm not saying it's Seb's fault. I'm not saying it's Ferrari's fault. It's a little bit of both, maybe. But these things unfortunately do happen. Obviously, from the point of view of a Ferrari fan, Seb's had 14 wins for us. I wish him all the best in the future of whatever he ends up going and doing. You know, I'd like to see him obviously do well for us this year, but we'll see how it goes.
Obviously, I mean, as I said, you know, the problem is, I think he was always compared to Michael Schumacher.
Yeah, it's not going to help.
and I mean, the German media, I can tell you that now, they absolutely thought that he was gonna emulate what Michael Schumacher did, and to be quite honest, I mean, let's face it, what Ferrari and Michael Schumacher did is never gonna be replicated by anyone, is it?
Well, the problem is it has been replicated by Mercedes because they've stuck to the formula of what Michael and Jean Todt and Ross Brawn and Rory Byrne did so successfully at Ferrari. Yeah. You know, I mean, Mercedes, their journey started with Ross Brawn in charge, putting elements in place and a work structure in place and a plan of how we're going to go about things. It's just that under his leadership, they didn't have the financial support from Mercedes for him to really do what he wanted to do. Yeah. Which is why Mercedes then sort of went, hey, you know, Toto, come over here, you know, and they listened to Toto because he was their friend. Yeah, basically is what happened. So they're running very much on the sort of structure that Ferrari had 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's a structure that works. It's about stability and trust. Yeah. And if you've got that and you're not worried financially, you're going to win titles.
Yeah, and I think Mercedes. I think Mercedes are doing. I don't know the exact figures, but I think they're doing pretty well out of. They're getting a return out of F1. I do believe.
Uh, they've if they haven't been making profit, they've been pretty close to it. And the thing is, it's just sort of if you're using it as a marketing tool, what better marketing than scoring win after win after win, championship after championship after championship? The only problem they've got, of course, is the moment they finish second, they're suddenly like, oh, it's all over.
Yeah.
How do you stay that successful for that long? I mean, the thing is, people have been expecting them to sort of fall a little bit for ages, and it's just not really happened.
Yeah, but uh, you know, uh, following on from that for a second, I think. Do you think there's going to be any dip in their performance, given that the first, I can't remember what his role is, but one of the major engine guys is leaving, isn't he?
He is, yes. But there's been an argument that the Mercedes powertrains have been trailing off a little bit for a while, and that they don't necessarily have the advantage that they had, say, certainly 2014, 2015, 2016 time. So it's possible that he feels that he's done everything he can with them, and it's time for someone else to take the lead anyway. They've got a pretty solid foundation set in place. They've got a pretty sorted and planned way of working things, and they'll have some intelligent guys there ready to step up to replace him. So I can't see it sort of suddenly Mercedes sort of massively dropping. And the other thing is they're limited a little bit on development now anyway, because they're obviously with the financial cost and whatever the sport is under, there is now like a token system in place for updates compared to just people being able to spend free reign whatever they want. So it's updates and stuff are going to be more limited, more controlled, more. They're not just going to be able to throw whatever they want at it. So I don't know how much free reign they're going to have to sort of develop it and stuff anyway, especially because there's more engine limitations coming in with the new regs, if I remember correctly, where
Yeah.
they were originally certainly talking about more sort of reduced cost on sort of special part development and all this sort of stuff. So I don't think that one guy leaving is going to turn it too much. I think it's more going to be just how Mercedes feel about continuing in F1 with everything else that's going on, and obviously whether it's diminishing returns to them because they've been winning so much. There's only one direction to go necessarily from there.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So we've discussed the Mercedes. So and we've discussed Vettel. So what do you make of the fact that Carlos Sainz has been signed for the Scuderia in 2021?
well, I think he's got a 2-year contract, which gives him 2 years to show to the rest of the paddock and the world what he can do. At which point Ferrari may or may not keep him, because obviously the problem Ferrari have got is that they've got a junior program of about 9 drivers trying to break into Formula One, and they need somewhere to put them. And 2 years would put it nicely of someone having a year in Alfa Romeo, and then if they are Charles Leclerc quick in the Alfa Romeo, possibly getting the Ferrari drive. Personally, I think that it'd probably be 2, maybe 3 seasons before one of them does get into the Ferrari seat at all, if they do, because being fast in the junior Formula isn't necessarily a guarantee you'll make it in F1. As Stoffel Van Dorn found out, it's a tricky business.
Yeah, so, but was that down to him, or was that down to the McLaren being a dog of a car?
It's a bit of both. Obviously, the rumor has it that he wasn't necessarily getting all the stuff on his car that Fernando was getting, which, yeah, would explain some of the absolute whitewashing in qualifying. Stoffel's a better driver than Formula One allowed him to show, I think. But we'll see how he goes. I'm pretty sure that he's going to have a good career anyway. So
do you think Sainz is going to play water boy to Leclerc, or do you think? Or do you think? Or do you think there's going to be fireworks?
I don't think he signed up to do that. Whether he ends up doing that, on the other hand, is another matter. Because walking into someone else's team who is lightning quick, I mean, I'm a Charles fan. I don't think Carlos is on his level. I think Carlos is good, but I think Carlos potentially has got more experience in terms of setup and stuff. So I think he will cause Charles problems if he chooses to do so. I think it's that thing where, from Carlos's point of view, the Ferrari seat is a shop window. Whether he finds success with them, whether he just plays the team game and picks up some strong results, podiums and a few wins or whatever else, it's about his future and where he's going to be looking at in a couple of years.
I mean, me personally, if I would have been Ferrari, I would have gotten, I would have gotten like Nico Hülkenberg back, because he wouldn't cause any issue for Ferrari. He would be happy playing second fiddle to Leclerc, because Ferrari have openly stated that they want to make that they want to make Charles the next Ferrari world champion. I think that's their aim. So and I think Carlos should have stayed at McLaren.
It's that thing, is what Carlos wants obviously is to get into a seat where he can score podiums, potentially wins, anything to boost the stats that people look at when they're discussing drivers. This driver has X amount of this driver has that amount of that. They don't necessarily view the equipment they were in when they got them. So at Ferrari, in the next 2 years or so, he's arguably got the chance to do that. Whereas McLaren are a team who very much were building up to being back at that point, but not there yet. So depending on where you're looking, how far down the road you're looking at, I think he's just hedging his bets basically with Ferrari. Because while he might not win championships or stuff there, it's another step closer to the front, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but then has Daniel Ricciardo made a mistake yet again?
Leaving Renault to move to McLaren is a sideways step. If it wasn't for McLaren's financial issues, I would have said it was a good move. The thing is, yes, Renault are a works team, but Renault are just weird. They've gone around the whole thing completely wrong. It's like if you go into Formula One and your benchmark is the Mercedes Formula One team or the Ferrari Formula One team, who are spending 450 million a year, you don't go into it thinking, well, I'm going to spend less than them to try and beat them or to try and catch up with them.
Yeah.
It didn't make a lot of sense the way they went about it. And Daniel Ricciardo went there and there was a lot of stuff he saw that he wasn't happy about or didn't feel was the way the team should be run or whatever. And him moving to McLaren is just basically a reaction and a reflection of that.
Question for you. I've said in one of my videos, I don't know whether you saw it, the 5 things that I predicted, that will happen in the 2020 season. I've said in one of them that Ricciardo is gonna get suspended or get kicked out before the end of the season, because I think Cyril and Daniel are gonna have a massive falling out. What do you think?
It's entirely possible. I can't rule it out because the thing is, the sort of falling out and the moving on is something that normally happens partway through a season when you have at least raced together for a little while. It happening at the start of the season before there's any racing, and you've got to go through the entire season looking across tables at each other, knowing that there is some serious resentment going on there. I can't see that ending particularly well. I mean, Cyril's not the type to sort of just go, well, I can sweep stuff under the table and go, well, you're still racing with us at the moment, so we'll play along with, we'll go with that. We'll try and do our best by you if you do your best by us. That doesn't seem his kind of character at all. You know,
so who do you think, if it was going to be if there was going to be fireworks, who do you think they would get back in?
The problem is who's available that they can have. I can't see Fernando deciding to join them partway through a season if he decided to join them at all. And then there's Renault being able to justify whatever cost it would take for Fernando, bearing in mind they're laying all these people off. It's not a good financial environment for that. Would Nico Hulkenberg necessarily want to go back to Renault, considering everything that went on there? I mean, a seat in Formula One is a seat in Formula One. It does put him back in the shop window again. But I don't know. I can't imagine him being overly happy with Cyril either. And the junior drivers who we might have thought would step up at the end of the year, I'm not sure how they do for super license points to be eligible to drive for Renault at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see Hulkenberg going in, although I've said yes. I've said in my predictions I can see him going in, but I think he doesn't want to end up like Daniel Kvyat, who's
Yeah.
So, and the Guan Young Zhou or whatever his name is, I don't think he's got enough super license points.
Well, I doubt it very much because his strongest finish he's had in any season that I've been watching him race was last year. Before that, I mean, that was his most impressive, most consistent season I've seen him have. I mean, he's always been quick on his day. Back in the Euro F3, he'd be nowhere for half a season and then turn up and win a race. So he's got the pace, but the consistency, I don't think he's not necessarily shown it. As say, last year was his best year, but he needs to build on that before he's looking at F1 seriously. I hesitate to say that Renault might put him on a seat for commercial reasons, because if he did get the super license points, then Chinese market, Renault, if you're struggling to sell cars, that's a interesting possibility. But that's for the future.
So, how would you resolve it if you was Cyril Beatville?
If I was Renault, I'd get rid of Cyril. I don't know him. He might be a lovely guy, but he just doesn't tend to show signs of it when he's anywhere near Formula One.
Yeah. I couldn't believe it. Like, I couldn't believe that they even, because first of all they were thinking they were going to leave, and now they're saying that they're going to stay. But I've since heard that it's not definite that they're going to stay. Or, I mean, Formula One is in the mess, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Let's say, I mean, if you're trying to save 4 billion euros or whatever the hell it was that the Renault are having to find and cut back on, they're going to be looking at their F1 project. So the cost cap for them has come at the right time as well. But you shouldn't be saying that about like the second biggest car manufacturer in the world, needing to save money and cut back on an F1 program. But that's where they're at.
So So, how if you was Claire Williams, right?
Yeah.
Or if you was Frank Williams, I mean, first of all, I mean, did you see the news yesterday? I think they broke that supposedly Rocket are now set to become.
Apparently they're going for Mercedes, yeah.
But I don't understand that, because how is that possible? Because they just said to the they just didn't pay Williams, so
The thing is, some of that might just come down to who's got the bigger checkbook, because obviously Michael Latifi is stuck branding on the car now. He's owed 50 million by Williams. He looks the most likely person to buy into the team. It's entirely possible that the Rocket sponsorship was taking up the spot he wanted on their car. Then you've also got to look at the fact that Rocket might have said, okay, we love sponsoring you, we're happy to sponsor you, we will give you the money, but we want to actually get on a racetrack first. Which, if Williams needed the money now, isn't any use to them. So I can see a situation where Rocket had the money available. They weren't just freeing it up until the team could actually get racing again. And where Michael Latifi basically made Williams a better offer.
Yeah. So, because given the fact that Williams are in deep financial trouble, on the brink of a sale, do you think it is actually a 100% sale, or do you think it's actually it's just a part sale? Because it would break my heart if Frank would lose any input in the team.
As well, we've discussed this one in comments before. I think the family would only like a part sale. Their opinion is that they're assessing options, but when it comes down to it, what they're trying to protect is the team, the facilities, the people who work for them. That the heritage collection ends up somewhere with someone who might value it, rather than just ended up being broken up and sold piecemeal. So they would rather, I suspect, sell the company 100% to someone they trust than try and end up getting into bed with someone for a 50% share who wouldn't necessarily look after their best interests.
Yep.
So
are you looking forward to Austria, obviously?
I am. I mean, Austria is normally a good race anyway, but having been waiting so long for racing to happen, it's almost like got surreal, the idea now that we're a couple of weeks away from something actually happening. It's sort of like almost daring not to breathe in case something happens in the meantime. It's just like, I'm going to think about it. I'm going to step back from it. And when I hear the engines on track and the cars and the 5 lights, they go out, whatever, then I'm going to be like, yes. Until then, I'm just like, fingers crossed, just please be okay.
So, has the lockdown been all right for you?
I've been working.
Oh, yes.
So that it's really kind of weird for me, because 80% of my life isn't really changed. I get up in the morning, I go to work, I come back, and it's sort of like, then you come back and you hear people on Twitter, it's lockdown, I've been doing this, I've been doing that, I've not been at work, I've been doing whatever else. And then where it affects me is I've not been able to see my daughters, because I don't live with them, so I've not been able to go around and see them or whatever. So that's where it's been a bit of a drag for me, and unfortunate for me. But it's when you step away from work and then come back home to what everyone else is doing and the situation everyone else is in, is like there's two different worlds, and you're sort of traveling between the two of them almost. It's really weird.
So I can't wait for it all to get up and running again, because I haven't, I've only just recently started going training again, because I go to the gym quite regular.
Yeah.
And I also have back massages because of sitting in the wheelchair all the time.
Yeah.
My back really hurts. And for me, I just want it to be over, so that I can have back massages again, so that I can get to the get a bit of normality going.
Yeah. I think that's
But
what everyone wants, is just normality, or as close to it as we can get as soon as we can get it. But
so, final question for you. Have you like who do you think is going to be world champion?
ooh, um, the problem is all we've got really to go on is testing, and looking at that, you'd have to say probably Lewis Hamilton. I think it'd be very difficult. And it's very difficult to look past him. The Mercedes aren't going to stop being probably the best car out there and the most slickly run operation overnight.
Yeah.
And the thing is, he's old enough and experienced enough now, and has enough trust in the team and the management or whatever else, that he has that thing that Michael and Senna and all the greats had, of being able to drag a performance and a victory or a strong points result out of a position he shouldn't necessarily have been able to do it in. It's you don't tend Lewis doesn't tend to have DNFs or failures or particularly bad races. His bad race is a fourth or a fifth place.
Yeah.
It's when you're coming up against someone who's learnt that skill of making the most of every opportunity and maximizing your points every time you go out. It's very hard to try and get an advantage over that, or one that lasts anyway.
So yeah. So very final question. Who, who, how long do you reckon Lewis Hamilton is gonna go on for? How many championships do you reckon he's gonna end up having? And is who is the greatest of all times? Senna, Schumacher, or Hamilton?
Greatest of all time is a very tricky one, because it's obviously it's laid out according to so many different things. You've obviously, the cars are different, the circumstances are different, the careers drivers had were different. Jackie Stewart, for example, was a 3-time world champion. He won 3 world championships and 27 races in 99 starts, which is crazy. When you look at Manuel Fangio, exactly the same, 5 world championships and a number of starts these days that we'd look at and go, well, that's nothing, because there's so many races now in a season compared to then. So you can't look at numbers when judging a career necessarily.
Yeah.
I don't think you can necessarily say there is a best of all time, just simply because so many drivers have come and gone who were at their peak and ruled the roost for a period of time, or were against other great drivers and had some fantastic rivalries. The drivers everyone talks about, of course, Prost, Senna, Niki Lauda, Manuel Fangio, Jim Clark. There's so many. It all forms the canvas and the history of the sport, which is why we love it so much. Just wherever you look, at any point you look, there's always a story, there's always a tale, there's always some guy, and other people trying to knock them off their perch, and that's part of the excitement of it. I can't pick a best. I mean, I'm a Michael fan, but if you asked Michael, he'd have probably said Senna. If you'd have asked Senna or Manuel Fangio, they'd have said Jim Clark. So even they can't agree.
So shall we just agree on the fact that there's no greatest of all time?
Yeah, I'll go with that.
How many championships do you think Lewis is still gonna do?
The thing is, he doesn't look like he's going to lose interest in it anytime soon. It's just like, other people leave the sport and then go off and do other things. Lewis is doing other things while he's still in the sport, and he's sort of doing that to refresh and keep his interest in the sport almost. So I can't see him disappearing anytime soon. I think he'll want to give the new regs a go to see how those cars drive and what they're like. So, and Mercedes are not going to unlikely to build a dog of a car, whether it'll still be dominant or whatever else. They're a slick operation, providing Mercedes decide to sort of keep supporting it as a works outfit, then I can't see them falling completely off the perch. I'd say he'll probably win 8.
Right. Okay, so we agree on 8 then. So cheers for coming on, Dave.
Thank you for having me.
So do you want to say any more? Anything else?
No, just obviously it's just looking forward to going racing and watching that, and obviously thank you for having me on here. It's been good to chat to you, and anyone wants to get behind this man's channel and support him, that would be very appreciated, I'm sure, by him and by the rest of us in the F1 motorsport community.
Yeah, and I'll leave a link in the description, and so maybe when this is all over, maybe if you ever don't in the near Staffordshire area, let me know, and then we can go for a pint or something.
We'll see how it goes. I mean, I don't tend to travel too much other than circuits, to be honest with you. I'm a bit boring, but thank you very much, though, Raz. It's a very good offer. We can only see how the future holds, can't we?
Yeah. So cheers for that, Dave, and
cheers to you too as well, mate.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye.